Yes, I'd like to call up next.
Yes.
Well,
So moving on to our program, no. The next speaker is no stranger to the group. No, we've already introduced him partially, but of course, para very formal, sir. Ano ho? Dr. Professor Charles YU is the current Vice Chancellor for Research of the DLS MHSI. He is a past president of the PCP, and he has recently been conferred that PCP exemplar for research, I think 2021, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes,
So,
that's right.
Dr. Yu?
Yes, and his talk is on the need for convergence, post-pandemic lessons, and the DLSM HSI experience. Charlie.
Good morning, everyone. Mamaya kukuha ko ng selfie because this is one of the... it took us 2 weeks to prepare for this event, just to let you know. And so we're very happy that you are all here. Imagine if we had a year-long preparation to do an even bigger event. So I'd like to thank the OST Secretary Solidum for really gracing us. I was telling him the last DOST Secretary to visit this place was when this was blessed in 1994. Okay, so it's been a long time since we've been trying to convince our DOST secretaries to see what we are doing. So marami pong salamat sa inyong lahat and to the VIPs in the audience. First, I'd like a disclaimer. Ang aking i-represent is my own perspective. So the DLS-MHSI does not necessarily reflect some of the things that I am going to say. I will say when in a way it is more institutional. So we thought of the COI as nagkataon lang na in a festival mall exhibit, they had this nice koi, and I said this could be a good painting that could symbolize what we were trying to do in this Philippine Innovation Forum. Okay, and this is not just LaSalle, but actually reflects much of the work. Cebol is there on the left. Ewang, if you notice, that's the Cebol group. The IBET group and some of the works we're doing at the back with the Ibalik project and the 3D works. And the HiFi STETI, which I think our group showed kanina what we're doing for tuberculosis. Next slide. So this is just a quick rundown, and I have 2 great examples of why we need to work together. Next slide. This one, I think Secretary knows more than me. The discovery in the 1980s that there was an ozone hole at the top of the world. The ozone is important because it protects us against the sunlight, the ultraviolet rays. And if this hole continues to grow, then it will have far-reaching consequences to the people on Earth. Okay? I should know that because I also am in the pulmonary field. The good news is, since it was discovered in the mid-1990s, and a Montreal Convention agreed to phase out the substances that were actually causing it to become bigger, that it has become smaller in the last 2 years, both due to man-made efforts as well as, I suppose, nature healing itself. Next slide. Next slide. One of the biggest contributors to the chlorofluorocarbons, aside from the hairsprays, which are now banned, refrigerators, air cons, was this. Since I'm a pulmo, I know this. Billions of self-actuated inhalers. They actually contain CFCs. And imagine the billions being consumed that were contributing to the environment. So among all the substances that actually contribute to CFCs, this was the one that was the last to be phased out because it needed time for scientists, engineers to develop an alternative to the inhalers that we use. I'm also asthmatic, so I'm very familiar with this. So thus was developed a new science that developed almost the same device, but now had a different propellant instead of CFC, using HFC or hydrofluorocarbons, and new devices that were air dry or powder delivered. So that, I think, helped, and this has been phased out since the 2010, and so you don't see anymore these CFCs. But this was one attempt that the world got together. It just so happened that the discoverer of the ozone hole was actually working with the British Antarctic Survey, and they discovered this and proved and Subsequently, in less than 2 years, they showed what was causing it. And it just so happened, since it was a British discovery, the British Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, was a chemist who understood the nature of what was happening. And that's why in less than 2 years, they developed the Montreal Protocol that created to the phase out of this substance. And now we have the good news that the ozone hole is repairing itself. Next slide. There is nothing probably more earth-shattering than the pandemic hitting all our lives. Alam mo noon, I have been a lifelong advocate of health, particularly in TB control for almost 30 years. Wala pong nakikinig sa amin. Health was what the news people said was, it is a something for the inside pages, if at all. We were not listened to no matter how much we advocated. And when this pandemic hit, it actually had an impact on every one of us. So naging importante ang kalusugan. Okay? And this is where we are now. As of, I guess this is February 15, 800 million people have been infected by COVID. That's 1 in 8 people. But ang tanong dyan, bakit yung 7 out of 8 hindi tinamaan ng COVID? So that's another query. But that's how it is with the impact of all the vaccines that have been delivered. Unfortunately, probably underestimate yan, about 7 million people have died. Next slide. But what is important and remarkable is the fact that for you to develop a vaccine, it usually takes ages. It usually takes 10 years of development to actually get a vaccine into market. And yet, from the time the COVID was detected by Chinese scientists in December of 2019, remember it was discovered and officially told to the world December 31 when WHO was informed, but it had been happening for months, probably since September, circulating in China. In less than 2 months, the genetic code of the COVID was broken by the same Chinese scientist. Using that genetic code, the Secretary Solidum has mentioned, actually kits were created to diagnose it, including the Manila Health Kit. By the way, Dr. Raul Distura is an alumni of our medical school. And from the 2 months, in 9 months, they were able to develop the first and the trials on the vaccines. And in less than a year or 2 years, then the virus had already had treatments. The trials were officially approved by FDA in 2020, almost a year to date when the virus was discovered, and the oral Paxlovid was actually launched 2 years later. This is a remarkable achievement of science in the world. People working together, actually investing trillions, where industry, private, and public sectors, scientists from all over the world working together to defeat the virus. So this is another shining example na pag gusto natin, magagawa. And this is what we should be inspired by. It's only when we get threatened from our own homes and lives do we take action. And the good silver lining in the cloud of the pandemic is finally people have shown the value of health. Importante sa atin ang kalusugan. Next slide. So those are 2 lessons. And as I said, almost 70% of the world has now received at least 1 vaccine. 13 billion doses have been administered, yet there's inequity because these are mostly in more advanced and middle-income countries, and only about 1/4 of those in the lowest-income countries have received the vaccine. Next slide. And this is our own national coverage of how many doses that have been administered, 166 million. And again, this is another example of public-private partnerships where we brought in the vaccines, and we had a huge effort to administer it to as many people as we can. So those are the lessons of that. Next. And those are the achievements. Next. Now, in our own De La Salle example, when this was in the early days, I remember it was Holy Week, the governor of Cavite, Governor John Vic, approached Brother Gas, then our president, asking about putting up a molecular lab, the first molecular lab outside the government reference labs in Manila and Visayas. And his reasoning was because it was La Salle. Secondly is because he had no choice, because the basic safety laboratory level 2+ was available in our TB lab. So we converted that TB lab into the first COVID lab. But that's not the story kasi dumaan kami sa butas ng karayom before that was approved. And Doc Tony formerly from Lung Center can attest to that story. But to cut a long story short, we established the most modern molecular lab at the back of this research center. We have done 250,000 tests since it was established. And more importantly, we established real-time data to all our mayors, and they made decisions about the lockdowns and what policies. We frightened them to death, literally, by showing them how many people will die and get hospitalized, how many ventilators was in the entire province of Cavite. And if they did not get there, act together, then many of their constituents will die. Okay. That is a story that needs a book to be written. Next slide. This is a personal story. In the course of the pandemic, I had a major accident while walking through our molecular lab. Actually, I thought it was a foot wound, a knee injury, but turns out it was my shoulder that started hurting, and it's also a combination of old age. Anyway, the reason I tell this story is I had a major surgery on the shoulder, but I then appreciated the rehabilitation that followed. Next slide. And I found out, next slide, na many of the rehab exercises and knee lock is repetitive. In fact, looking back, many of the things we do as doctors are actually not necessarily should be done by doctors. Paulit-ulit lang siyang ginagawa eh. And that's why I was fascinated when some of these projects of IBET and rehab and ortho came into fore. Kasi pwede naman siyang palitan, hindi kailangan tao. Next. So, what did we do during the pandemic? As I said, we have done over 200,000. And yet, despite the pandemic, we conducted COVID trials. And we are proud of the fact na last Valentine's Day, February 14, a new vaccine was approved in China and was started to be inoculated in millions of Chinese. This was done here with partners across the country, 10 sites. It is a spike protein that actually works for even the latest variant. It was done here during the height of the pandemic. We recruited from our site alone 1,400 subjects. In Bacoor, 2,000 subjects. But this is now a new vaccine that is available, despite all this. But there have been setbacks, as I told you, but it actually showed that public-private partnership must and should work. Next. What is evidence of that? This is presented in the back as our coach project. This is a DOST project that has been in the works for the last 5 years. It is trying to bring the treatment of TB patients, which is makulit at matagal, usually a year and a half, back nearer their homes. So you get a trained, motivated, kahit wala siyang sweldong treatment partner to see that the treatment. And we thought that with the closure and the lockdowns, hindi ka na makakalabas kahit neighbor ka nung pasyente because no one could go out, right? Yet, we found a way using the digital tools, using social media, Facebook, Messenger, Viber, etc. Look at that dotted line and the one on the right. The one on the left is pre-pandemic, nung actually dumadalaw sila. The one on the right is after the pandemic. Yet, the compliance of more than 90% was achieved higher during the pandemic than even before the pandemic. So even at the worst conditions of closure and lockdowns, we were able to achieve this using the digital tools. Okay, next. And we have evaluable subjects, and we have a success rate of 90% compared to the national program of around 65 to 70. This is something we should share with the world because it means now we need to scale this up on a nationwide basis. And I'm very proud of the people who are working on this. Next. And this one is for the households of the patients. And unfortunately, 11% of them will develop TB if you don't do anything. Next. So, I have talked with Dr. Tony for several hours since yesterday. And if there is an ease of doing business, which I think our governments are trying to improve using digital tools, there should be an ease of doing research. Ito na yung aking personal para maparinggan ko ang aming boss, si Secretary. If the COA requires us to get 3 providers for just buying coupon bond, there is something wrong with our procurement procedures. And it's maybe because naghihigpit mismo yung COA. It must be in such a way, procurement is already a challenge among universities. Ewang should know that. Nilo knows that. But it should not be made harder by regulatory. That, to me, sounds sometimes impractical. We have great islands of excellence, okay? IBET, CBOL, there's one in UST, there's one in Ateneo, there are many ones in the provinces. Pero hindi nag-uusap. One of the nice things we've done, Doc Tony, is we've signed a MOA with the University of San Agustin to promote joint research. We don't need a MOA with UP because we're already working closely with the UP Manila Group. But we need these islands to not just, kumbaga sa amin, hindi naman sa pagmamalaki, mas kilala po kami sa labas for our research work and our TB work. And mas marami pa nga kaming funding na kukuha from abroad than from our own. It should not be like that. It should be, we should exchange, because may iwanan na tayo ng bus. The countries around us have jumped by leaps and bounds. And we need to do. We have no lack of excellent people, the young people in the audience. When we had these robotics games a few weeks ago, ang gagaling ng mga nag-present sa mga public schools, sa mga private schools na grade 12, grade 11. Now, kung pwede lang silang hawakan at i-guide to the right places, that would be good. Success is built upon more collaborations. And this is actually done. We're doing a proposal with the University, Imperial College of London and the Japanese Anti-TB Association. The Tulay project is a successful project with the British funding from their national health systems. And the wearable robotics, as Secretary said, now has a patent on use. And I have patients asking about. But I will also talk about ChatGPT very quickly. You've heard of the, next slide. So, as we saw in the pandemic and in my own personal mishap, adversity is not our enemy. And as someone always said, what does not kill us makes us stronger. And there's a silver lining to every cloud. I was telling Doc Tony, our principle here in research is we are not a competitor to anyone. We are a friend to everyone. Whether it's the public, the private sector, whether it's international partners or what. Dapat ganon. We should set aside our petty rivalries kasi nga, inunahan na tayo eh. We must get our act together to be in pace with the rest of the world. So necessity is really the mother of invention. Next. So we have also learned, I have sat in the DOST-PCHRD for 12 years. And as Secretary has shown, we have adapted programs that were actually made for something else and used for COVID, including the FASTER program in Ateneo, sir, and COVID projects, as has been mentioned. But even the story of Dr. Destura, who is my inaanak and the inventor of the new PCR test, is something that we should all learn from, a learning lesson for all. Not always a happy story. The knee replacement project that there's a local knee, but kahit yung pag-usap, sir, sa PhilHealth to just get it accredited was already a gargantuan task. We have to patronize our own because we cannot just compete with the Chinese model or whatever. The ventilator projects has been ours for 20 years. And there have been, what I've noticed is there is a weakness in the chain of the proposal to its final release as a product. At the beginning, the weakness is hindi kinausap lahat ng stakeholders. Hindi kinausap yung pasyente, hindi kinausap yung public kung yung magagamit at magiging user-friend. Sa kabilang dulo, hindi marunong mag-entrepreneurial at mag-scale up ng product. So those are the two of the weakest links in the chain. Malakas tayo sa gitna, mahina tayo sa magdulo. Next slide. So I would propose, and I've been talking to Dr. Tony and Dr. Montoya, and he knows this, that we use the model that we did in Newton Agham, which was a DOST PCHRD, British Medical Research Council initiative. They brought the finest universities in UK, Oxford, name it, Cambridge, Imperial College, here, and some went there. And then they brought in our own scientists. They talked. They were forced to make a proposal. There was a request for proposals, one on TB, which we won, and it's gone for 5 years. Kailangan lang mag-meet. And they truly appreciated what we know and what we did. And we truly appreciated and learned from the technology transfer they did. This is now happening with the US NIH and again PCHRD. If I may recommend, the forum in the future should encourage this exchange of not just the academics, because sometimes hindi nga practical yung mga iniisip namin, pero with even students. Does this make common sense to you? With industry who will adapt it, with regulatory agencies, and this have been our attempt with Dr. Montoya, with the Philippine Clinical Research Network and the TB Network. The consortium, our R2D2 diagnostics, which will change the face of TB in the world if we succeed in some of these tests. The Tulay and the dengue, which will revolutionize the treatment of dengue in the country. And the inventors are, stand up please, Dr. Rita Alvero and Noni Alvero. Tayo na ba kayo? Do you know that the first world drug for dengue is being developed here with their help? And the turmeric curcumin, Dr. Rene, Sir Rene, can you please stand up also? He has this fantastic lab in Tagaytay that no one knows, and his colleague. Next. So next, again. So we're doing a lot of projects under ba yan? So this is a mathematical modeling project that we do. It took us 3 years to finish this. Mukhang ayaw talaga umandar. Next slide. Again. And this is going to be applicable. We actually proved that the new diagnostics being applied by DOH actually works. And we have gotten buy-ins from the DOH on this. And technology transfer on how to do the modeling. Next. And we've gathered tens of thousands of specimens, which we wish to show the Secretary after this break, and we'll show in our TB lab. Next slide. And these are the results we did for both Cavite, Davao, and eventually all the regions, major regions of the country. Next. We've had these all published because nothing is, walang silbi yung iyong ginawa kung hindi mo siya i-publish with the rest of the world. Next. And again, the very important R2D2, which is actually a multi-country study. Next. And we're actually doing anything from AI and X-ray to new blood tests to actually counting cough using a device. You might have seen the app that we're doing to actually listening to lung sounds. Next slide. And let me just fast forward. Next. Next. Again. Next. So we are using smartphones. We are using the cough sound. Next. Next. So next. This has already been presented and will be published soon. Next. 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 Okay. This might be of interest, especially to the young. You probably heard of the Chat GPT. Okay? This is the super intelligent BOT or artificial intelligence that has been developed by Microsoft and was bought by Microsoft. Next. So I tried it. I actually joined the Chat GPT. Okay? This is how it looks like. Try it. Next. So these are the examples of what they do. In education, I think there are teachers here. We are afraid na dadayain ng students yung essay na pinapagawa sa atin because they will just go to chat. But it is, I tried it myself. Next. So medyo mayabang ako. So nilagay ko Charles Yu and tuberculosis. Walang lumabas. Okay. It even says na if there is such a thing as Charles Yu. Okay. Next. So I made it more specific. What if I type AI and TB? And hindi papasa sa akin yung nilabas niyang info. It's too generic. It's too information. So at this point in the stage of the AI development, it still needs a human expert to make it at a higher quality. However, next slide. They tried the ChatGPT and made them take the medical exam of the doctors in America. Pumasa yung robot. One of the hardest medical exams in the world, the ChatGPT passed that exam, except the part that has some human component about compassion and advice, kasi ChatGPT cannot give advice. But imagine that, napasa niya ang exam. I'm not giving you ideas. Next. So, I have always lectured to every student for the last 30 years that robots will never replace the doctors. And our basis was they cannot replace us in compassion and human touch. Unfortunately, they have now developed a robot that can actually show nice words. And when the baby was asked and did a test comparing it to human moms and robots, the baby could not distinguish between the robot and the mom. So nawala na yung argument ko. Next. So your robots are becoming human. Unfortunately, they're making it too human. So yung Bing, which is a search engine, naging masungit na siya. Nilagyan nila ng character na parang tao. So yung isa, galit na galit siya dun sa nagtatanong sa kanya, sinabi niyang mukha kang Hitler o mukha kang ano. So the Microsoft is trying to change. Next. So there's this fascinating book that you might want to read, Dan Brown's Origin. But I like what was derived from there. We are now in a generation of humans where we already are partly robotic. Imagine yourself without your cell phone. You can't. The cell phone has become, and the laptop have become an indispensable part of our humanity. Right? Yet, singularity is a term that hopefully you will hear for the first time. This is the time when the robots will equal or excel humans. And they estimate that singularity will be achieved in 2050. Na yung ating mga nightmares sa ating mga movies will happen because they will become more intelligent than us. Next. So what's the lesson? We really depend on outside. The sad thing about the pandemic is everything had to be imported. Lahat. Hanggang sa mask. No, we couldn't invent. A few did. Everything. We had to send specimens to Australia just to verify the first samples. But indigenous expertise and excellence is present. From personal experience and from the long years with PCHRD. The world needs to work together, as you've seen in my two examples, but we need each other. We need to get out of our islands and our silos, and we need to interconnect and converge, the theme of this conference. New technologies can bridge the distance and improve communication and improve. And the difference between technologies and perspectives need to be accounted. If I'm a health economist coming from the economic side, I will be having a different perspective than a doctor doing health economics. Next. So the rocky road, not in emergency mode, one hand not seeing the other, ayoko na expound yan. Expound weaknesses. The whole pandemic saw the weaknesses in our entire system, not just our health system. Next slide. So, last slide. Next. Last are my personal thoughts. We need to completely map out where we are in the area of innovation. We need, before a roadmap, nasa na tayo? These islands of excellence. Where are we compared to the world? And where is it that we have not discovered these centers? And they are doing fine. We need to then connect the dots. And we need to learn from the local partners. We need to be humble enough to know that we are inuunahan. We need to strengthen the value chain and strengthen what I said was the weakness in each end. We need an alliance of like-minded institutions and persons for what I call convergence. We need a new think that we cannot proceed with the old think or we will become obsolete. Ulitin ko. We need a new thing or we will become obsolete. The students will become better than the teachers. But the technology is just the tools. Kahit you have the power of information in the internet, you need somebody who can be your steward. Because not many out there, garbage nandyan yan. Even with the ChatGPT, they have not yet reached that level of sophistication. We use our weakness for our strength. And as the song said in the first invocation, Let us be the change we want to see. Let us talk, and let's start talking now. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Charles Yu. Charlie, thank you very much. Okay, we're going to have a 5-minute
Yes.
coffee break.
Coffee
Please,
break.
please come back agad so we can start with our next morning session. Thank you.